Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
Well, hello everyone. This is not at all how I had envisioned our time together this evening, but what I'm finding in many different arenas of my life is that flexibility seems to be the order of the day, and so thank you for joining me tonight online as we come together. And even though I can't be there physically with you in Houston, I will be, I'm standing by to have a live discussion with you afterwards through the marvels of technology. So my talk title is You Can't Sleep Through Your Awakening. It's also the title of my book. And I'm making an assumption right now that if you're tuning in and you're listening or watching this, that you are not asleep, that you are physically awake. And this evening we're going to explore what it means to be spiritually awake. And sad to say, it seems like you can't sleep through this awakening. As the Armenian spiritual teacher Gurdjieff tells us, you can't unconsciously become conscious. Julia Cameron, the author of The Artist's Way, tells us that we are spiritual beings having spiritual business to transact on this physical plane. And I love that. That's one of my favorite descriptions of us as spiritual beings, having human experience on this planet. So what I want to ask you is, do you know that about yourself? Do you really know that about yourself? Do you live your life as if that were true? Because when we forget that, when we're unconscious to who we really are, we can end up sleepwalking through life. You know, we can sort of skim the surface of it. We never plumb the depths. As the poet Diane Ackerman writes, "Of shallow life creates a world as flat as a shadow." So spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit about the shadow tonight. So the truth is this: we're not here to sleep through this whole experience. We're actually here to dive deep, to wake up, to be who we have come here to be, spirit expressing on our planet, a spiritual being with spiritual business to transact in this physical world. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a story told that is comparable to the prodigal son. In this parable, the son is a prince who inadvertently strays outside of the palace walls as a very young child. And he gets lost, and then he wanders and wanders, forgetting he's a prince. Years go by, and he ends up living his life as a pauper on streets. And eventually he grows into young adulthood. And the king, who is always on the lookout for his beloved son, happens upon him one day and joyfully recognizes him and rescues the prince, reveals his royal identity to him. However, the young man has been asleep to his true self. He has no memory of being asleep, of being a prince. And he has trouble imagining that kind of life, let alone actually living that kind of life. And it takes time for him to release all of the beliefs that he has acquired in his life of poverty and to grow into the belief and the realization that he really is of royal lineage, and then begin to live his life that way. And it's a wonderful metaphor for us as we can consider our own journey. I mean, we know that we are spirit expressing in a human body. I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard before. Don't we learn that in New Thought? We are all part of the one presence. We are unique expressions, individualizations of the one spirit. This is a key element in New Thought philosophy. But do we really believe it? Do we really live our lives as if that were so? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to wake up to who we truly are and to embody that truth in our world. New Thought founder Ernest Holmes tells us we are ever expanding. We are the ever expanding principle of conscious intelligence. Forever expanding, never ending, eternally increasing conscious intelligence. And so do we think of ourselves that way, or do we find that maybe we are stuck in the limited labels that we may have worn in the past somewhere in our lives, but are continuing to wear? I mean, when you look in the mirror in the morning, do you say, "Good morning, ever expanding conscious awareness, conscious intelligence"? I mean, that would be a good way to start our day, wouldn't it? And so I'm inviting you tomorrow morning when you get up to begin your day that way. Look into the mirror and say, "Good morning, ever expanding conscious intelligence." But here's the thing, there's a difference between knowing spiritual principle and living spiritual principle. It's a whole different realm to apply these truths that we know. From the book Zen Judaism, which is a delightful mix of Zen and Jewish wisdom kind of blended together, it says this: to study the way of the Buddha is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to experience the complete dropping away of body and mind. Now that's the Zen part. Here's the Jewish part. The difficult part is keeping body and mind off after you've dropped them. Many people gain back body, mind, and an additional 15 pounds. Now it's tongue-in-cheek, but I really can relate to that phenomenon, you see. Being awake is a moment-by-moment experience for us of returning to this truth of who we really are and really living it, and being aware of the kinds of things that we have taken on that are hiding that truth from us. So what keeps me dozing away? Well, to begin with, I'm not even aware I'm sleeping. You see, right now, I seem to be awake. You know, I'm conscious of my surroundings. I'm not comatose. And yet, what's really going on around me that I am unaware of? Did you know that research tells us that there are 400 billion bits of information available to us right now to be accessed? 400 billion bits. However, our brain can only process 2,000 bits in any given second. 400 billion, 2,000. That's a whole lot of bits that we're unaware of. So try to imagine what it would be like to suddenly be bombarded with 400 billion bits of information. There's a lot going on that we're just not conscious of. And so to really look at this, there's time for a science experiment. If you're up for this with me, you don't have to move from where you are. To do this, I invite you to look down at the floor and put your foot on the floor and lightly tap it. And look at your foot tapping while it's lightly hitting the floor. Okay. All right, you can stop. So here's the question. Was your experience that you were watching your foot touch the ground while you were feeling it touch the ground? Could you see it and feel it at the same time? And I'm imagining you're all nodding your heads, because if that's the case, then congratulations, you have just done the impossible. Why? Because the speed of light is vastly faster than the synaptic conduction time it takes to get from that message from your foot to your brain. So you should see it before you feel it, and the delay should be noticeable. There's even a name for this phenomenon. It's called delay and antidating hypothesis paradox. It's worth Googling just to read about it. And there are several theories as to why this happens the way it does. But the one that really rings true for me, given what little I do know about brain science, is that both events happen at different times but are remembered simultaneously. In other words, the brain is editing our experience in order to jive with our interpretation of reality. So there is stuff going on that we're unaware of, and our mind edits our experience for us. And here's the important part. It neglects to tell us that it's doing so. and it has selective editing. It's designed to do this because it's assisting us with interpreting and making sense of our world. It focuses on what is ours to focus on rather than trying to make sense of 400 billion bits of information. And so the question is, how does it know what 2,000 bits to let in? Well, the editing that goes on depends on the filters through which I view my world. These filters arise from decisions about life, about ourselves, about other people that we made at a very, very young age, sometimes even pre-verbal. Those decisions then become beliefs that are hidden away. Transparent beliefs is what they're called because we see our life through them. And they become so deeply woven in our psyche that we barely perceive them, let alone question them. So the brain edits my experience based on these filters. And if I have a belief, for instance, that tells me that life is unsafe, then what will my experience be as seen through that filter? I will discover all of the endless ways in which life is indeed unsafe. And I'll gather evidence to support the belief that life is unsafe. And I won't even be aware that I'm doing it, or that I have these hidden filters behind it. I won't even see it. All I'll know is that life's unsafe. It's true. I didn't make it up, right? And here's my truth, all this evidence. What if I believe there's something wrong with me, that I'm inadequate, or that I don't measure up in some way? What will I discover then? Will I find evidence that I am ever-expanding conscious intelligence if I am seeing life through the belief that there's something inherently flawed or wrong with me? No, I will not. And then something else will happen here. If I took on a belief that there was something wrong with me at a very young age, I'll repress that belief because it's just too painful for me to look at that directly. Instead, I might decide that it's really about someone else, that they're the problem. I will project what's too painful for me to look at within myself onto someone else. It's all about that guy. He's the problem. You know, we all do this. It's part of being human. It's a symptom of a newly discovered disease that I just made up, HSD, Humanity Sleeping Disorder, or sleep apnea of the soul, if you will. Now, to be clear, this is not about blame. It's not about beating ourselves up. Metaphysics does us no good if we use it to inflict guilt and shame upon ourselves or upon others and then wallow in that self-judgment. That's not what it's about. It's about having compassion. Compassion for all of us on this journey, for family members, for teachers, for friends from our childhood, for the classroom bully, everyone who's been a part of our path in our childhood and beyond. We're all walking around with these unconscious patterns of behavior and forgetting the amazingness that we are, suffering from humanity sleeping disorder. And you know something? We are so courageous, all of us, to walk through our lives unaware of the magnificent beings that we are. That takes guts, really. We're all so courageous to say yes to this. So the bottom line is this. The world mirrors back to us what's really going on in our own psyche. And when we have these disowned parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at, or we're repressing, it's called our shadow, we project them out onto the world and attribute that to be the problem. And with all this muck getting in the way of our awareness, we lose sight of the preciousness of the divine presence that we all are in expression. Now, is there hope for us? The correct response is yes. So I'd like to invite you all just to nod your head wherever you are. So let me give you the good news. Are you ready here? Lean in. Our projections can help us to awaken. Now that's the good news, bad news. We might think of those projections as what Byron Katie refers to as compassionate alarm clocks. You see, they wake us up, because when I make a judgment about someone else, that is a pivotal wake-up moment for me if I choose to use it as one. That's the key. You know something, we can pray, we can meditate, we can read, we can go to workshops, we can go to retreats, we can go to classes to learn all about spiritual principle. I love that stuff. I live for that stuff. But where the rubber really meets the road, where we roll up our sleeves and get down to the depths of our spiritual work, is in the arena of human relationship. Especially a relationship with someone who can push our buttons. Do you know what I mean by this? Do you have a button pusher or two in your life? They are very typically close at hand, very conveniently close at hand. And they're so valuable for us because they can clearly show us those places where we're in need of healing. With great accuracy, they can zero right in on it. It's like finding a sore spot, you know? And why does it hurt to get our buttons pushed? Because it goes to one of those places that we don't want to look at. A belief that we've been hiding from ourselves and projecting it onto someone else. Now, hear me clearly. I am not suggesting anyone stay in any kind of an abusive relationship. If you are in an abusive relationship, you need to get yourself safe. So let's be clear on that. But however, what I'm talking about are the irritations, you know, the socks on the floor, you know, the annoyances, the paper cuts of life. Those paper cut moments are surprisingly ripe with abundant opportunities for our spiritual growth and awakening. And yet this is when we would much rather hit the snooze button and nap our way through rather than seeing the value of that moment of having our buttons pushed. But when we choose to use those moments as awakening moments, now the work becomes dealing with that button, the inner button. Do you see? This is one of the powerful practices that we can take on as spiritual beings with spiritual business to transact. Did you know that one of the ways that samurai warriors learned to do a battle with each other was by hitting the pressure points on their bodies, you know, pushing each other's buttons in a big way? And there's a story told about one samurai who was soundly defeated through this method of combat. And after that, he gave it all up to spend time in the wilderness, contemplating his life. 20 years later, he again encountered his previous opponent, who challenged him to another fight. The samurai agreed, and this time the other fighter was surprised to see that no matter how many times he hit those pressure points, there was no reaction. And the samurai explained that he had spent his time in contemplation working with the pressure points, changing the sore spots. They were no longer available to be triggered. And in a sense, that's the work that we do. Becoming aware of the sore spots within us when we get triggered, being curious about what that is, discovering what's behind it, and making an internal shift. And what happens then is that those sore spots lose their soreness. They lose their ability to send us over the edge. And they actually become portals to our own awakening. Because we really start to see, well, that's not who I am. Maybe I have a belief that there's something wrong with me, and this is touching that and pushing that button. But that's not the truth of me. The truth is, I am ever expanding conscious intelligence. Now, usually we don't do this work too willingly. Nobody wants to look at their stuff, you see. I mean, we can hear ourselves saying, you know, this is negative energy. I don't want to mess with this. I didn't tune in to hear this message today. I'm all about being positive, affirming the truth. Yes, we absolutely are, especially in New Thought. But as we are busy affirming, it can be very easy to ignore the denial part of the equation. You see, we can affirm our good all we want, but if there is something that is sabotaging our success and we're unaware of it, will transformation happen? No. If we're affirming one thing and believing another, guess what? The belief will win hands down every single time. And here's the thing, we can go along pretending that the shadow doesn't exist and ignoring it, but it won't go away. It maybe goes into hiding, but it's having an effect on us whether we know it or not. In fact, these unconscious self-limiting beliefs are much more impactful when we're unaware of them. They cause way more havoc in our life when they're simmering away under the surface than when they're brought into the light of day with self-compassion. And the thing to remember is this, as the Franciscan priest Richard Rohr teaches, pain not transformed is pain transmitted. Pain not transformed is pain transmitted in some way by either projecting it onto someone else or beating ourselves up internally, and it will often slip out when we least expect it. It's kind of like a beach ball, holding a beach ball underwater that is just going to slip up somewhere along the line, popping up somewhere out of the blue. We are creative beings, and we're always creating, either consciously or unconsciously. Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, said to be ignorant of mind and its laws is to be a child playing with fire. And so awakening means becoming aware of when default patterns of behavior are running our lives and being empowered to make a new choice. This work is empowering work. It is enlivening work. It is freedom to be who we've come here to be, unencumbered by the thoughts and the beliefs and the attitudes and the filters that we have accumulated over the years. Becoming aware of when we are sabotaging our success through ingrained patterns of behavior and having the power in the moment to change it. We do this work through the power of the heart, because from this high view, consciousness eclipses all of it, see? The author, Tam McKeeves, writes this, as we set free a previous definition of who we have been, we can gracefully become what life is directing us to be. And she adds, without familiar crutches, we discover wings. And the truth is, we are limitless, divine, potential. We have access to a higher dimension of creativity, and we do not serve this world by playing small. And it's time. It's time for us to be truly free and to be who we've come here to be. Here to make a difference in our world, not just to sleepwalk through this marvelous experience of life, but to realize something, that we have the freedom, the power, the ability in the present moment to live a heart-centered, compassionate life as conscious, aware expressions of spirit. Next Saturday, this Saturday, my husband Gary and I will be facilitating a training called the Q process that explores these principles in greater detail and how to do it. It includes a 21-day practice that is helpful in working through these triggering moments and mining the gold that they contain. And that is what living an awakened life can look like. And there's still opportunity to sign up for it if you're interested. So let me leave you with these words from the poet Mary Oliver as she speaks about really living life. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was a bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Beautiful words of wisdom. So I invite you to remember that you are a spiritual being with spiritual business to transact on this physical plane, and to dive deep into the present moment and feel the wonder and the joy of discovery that comes from living an awakened life as ever expanding conscious intelligence. Here's to the exploration. So here are some questions to consider as we look at all of this, the awakening process. How would your life be different if you lived as if your button pushers were actually your allies and utilized whatever that was showing you to do your inner healing? How would your life be different than it is now if you were unable to get triggered by those button pushers? Just give that some thought. And then what kind of spiritual practices do you have that help you to awaken during these moments of having buttons pushed? What ahas have you received during triggering moments? And finally, what spiritual practices have you found to be most effective in dealing with any triggering moments in this particular difficult time of isolation and uncertainty in our human family's history? What are you using in order to help you to awaken in the midst of all of what's going on?
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.